Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. There is big news around college athletics. Late Friday night, the House settlement that you perhaps heard a lot about did receive final approval. What does it mean? Well, we certainly know what Kirby Smart hopes that it means. We'll kind of share that with you. And we'll talk about why the battle lines may just now being drawn for all of the future fighting that's going to take place because of what happened there on Friday night. Plus, there is interesting recruiting news for Georgia, not necessarily of the good variety. Jon Stinchcomb joins us. All of it on the way. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Word of warning and also a promise to you right off the show to start here today. We are going to talk about the big news that's out there. It involves a court settlement, a legal proceeding. So there's a little bit of a warning about that some of this could, in lesser skilled hands, a lesser trained broadcast voice, could sort of veer into the realm of like tedium and like legalese. We are going to work very, very hard to prevent that from happening. Then we're going to talk about what is out there, the facts, and I'm going to try to sum all this up in a very succinct and simple way of sort of what this means going forward, what is going to happen next. Now, I don't necessarily have the full answer on that, but I do think I can sort of scribble it out in fairly easy to understand terms of sort of the next big, obvious step as it relates to all of this. So let me give you a little bit of backstory here for a moment and kind of fill in some of the factual details, and then we'll kind of get into the other stuff of this. You have heard perhaps over the last few months, last year or so, about the House versus NCAA legal case. It was a lawsuit brought against the NCAA related to revenue payments. And the approved, final agreement here that kind of came out Friday night from a judge named Claudia Wilkin opens the door for back pay for previous college athletes, I think dating back 2016, and direct revenue payments to current college athletes. We have seen since 2021 NIL payment, where players have been allowed to take advantage of their name, image, and likeness. In other words, they could be commercial endorsers, they could be paid by third parties. They just could not be paid by the university athletic departments directly and preserve their amateur status. Well, that is no longer true. This legal proceeding now makes it possible and now makes it's going to happen that athletes will be paid by the athletic departments from the direct revenue they receive, most of that coming from the TV contracts. That is now going to happen. In addition to that, you're going to see a little bit of a difference in how rosters are constructed going forward. For instance, the football rosters will now be capped at 105. That's lower than the previous number. Theoretically, in some sports, the scholarship limit could go up, but the truth is a lot of that's window dressing. We could see as many as 5,000 fewer college athletes per year moving forward than we currently have because of the way that all of this will shift. There's going to be a financial figure in excess, $20 million, it's like $20.5 million, something in that neighborhood, that will now be shared directly with athletes. The majority of that going to football. The next highest total will be, in most cases, men's basketball, and then women's basketball, kind of the next group of that, getting about 5% of the revenue. And then all of the other sports will then share a remainder of about 5% of the revenue. This is the way that most programs, I think, are going to structure their revenue sharing coming out of the House settlement. And, of course, the big part of all of this is that while NIL remains the chance to kind of make additional name, image, likeness money on top of your direct compensation from the athletic departments, it is supposedly going to be capped at what's being described as a fair market value after each NIL deal in excess of $500 is scrutinized by the consulting firm Deloitte. There's like a big software thing that all the universities going to have or athletic departments are going to have to sort of plug in all the NIL deals. And Deloitte supposedly is going to either approve those or it won't. And Deloitte told I think it was the ACC going back to their spring meetings a few weeks ago that the overwhelming majority of what we've, kind of understood as NIL deals the last couple of years, which were essentially NIL in sort of name only. They were actually a lot closer to pay for play. Deloitte told the gathered assemblage with the ACC at their spring meetings that the overwhelming majority of what we've kind of thought of as NIL would not have been approved. That like the third-party stuff that actually comes from companies, for the most part, those were real NIL deals. But the stuff that's been kind of coming from boosters, the great number of those would have been rejected, Deloitte told the ACC recently. So this could potentially represent a huge change, a brand new era for college sports if it actually takes shape the way that it's written legally, the way that it's been described in the media. But ultimately, we don't really know that. And that's where we kind of get out of like the sort of facts and the kind of the mumbo jumbo of all of this. And this is where I think we get to something that's a lot easier for everybody else to understand. That in the immediate aftermath of this House versus NCAA settlement, what you're really about to see in college athletics is a couple of different sides here make pretty sizable bets about what they think the future of college athletics is going to be. And this is one of those things that Kirby Smart has been pretty articulate about over the course of the last couple of months. I don't know if he's right or not, but his point of view, I think, has been clearly expressed. Let me start with going back to just a few weeks ago in May, Smart speaking to Paul Feinbaum about kind of the ramifications of what the House settlement could provide. It's Smart's belief that it might bring what he would view as some of the more outlandish payments to high school seniors, incoming freshmen, that this settlement might bring some of that to heel. Smart telling Feinbaum sort of exactly what he wanted college athletics to look like in a post-House settlement world. This is just from a couple of weeks ago. Here's Kirby Smart.
Where we are right now, I think every coach agrees we're in a good place with being able to compensate players. Call it pay for play, call it NIL. I don't care what you call it. We're all in a good place with that. We just want it to be in a way that's sustainable. I just want it to be able to, have a freshman come in and not make more than a senior. And I'd like for other sports to be able to still survive. We're on the brink of probably 1 to 2 years away from a lot of schools cutting sports. What's the pushback going to be then when you start cutting non-revenue sports? I don't want that to happen.
So that's kind of the Kirby doctrine right there as it relates to this. He wants sustainable NIL, the sort of thing that college sports can do and operate with for many years into the future, not the sort of desperate thing of, let's pay $2 million to this incoming freshman or $3 million to this incoming freshman, and then let's just sort of figure it all out in the future after that. Smart says he wants the NIL landscape to be more sustainable, and he also wants to see other sports be able to survive. And that's probably, to a degree, not lip service, that we will see, in some cases, fewer athletes playing those sports. We will see less money going to those sports, that the sort of easy street that some of these, especially Olympic-style sports that generate no money at the college level, the sort of easy street that they've been on in the past when it comes to college athletics, that may not be quite such a guarantee moving forward. There are a lot of people who believe that Smart is standing on firm ground when he says that is a legitimate concern. And for what it's worth, prior to what he said in May, if you want to go back during spring practice, Smart was even more forceful about why there is the need for the Deloitte clearinghouse and for the House settlement to take effect, to bring an end to what he was more than happy at that time to describe as really kind of a Wild West, lawless anarchy of, crazy payments and roster uncertainty and just really kind of a nightmare for coaches to deal with. There was one night in particular during spring practice where Smart got very forceful and very specific about all the problems that he saw. And there are a lot of coaches right now who sort of hope that the ramifications of the House settlement that kind of came to shape late Friday night bring an end to some of what Smart was talking about then. Let's go back to April to hear this from Kirby.
Everybody's on pins and needles because we don't know exactly what's going to come out of this. What I do know is that we're going to continue to recruit people who love football, who are passionate about football, and that don't put money as the number one answer. Like, I've never met a really good player that's all they cared about. So, like, the 105 number, the NIL number, what's the cap number, what is this going to be? There's stuff going on right now, guys, in college football. I mean, there's people reaching out to have a Zoom call and present all the players they represent that are on teams, including our teams. And they want to invite people to the Zoom so they can watch and see who's going in the portal or shopping who's in the portal before the portal. Do you want to get on the Zoom and look at all these players? I'm like, well, what if some of them are mine? I mean, it could be one of the most legendary, moments in all of college sports with what's coming up on this ruling and how people are going to try to manipulate a cap when all we're trying to do is make for competitive balance. And it's really unfortunate that I don't know if competitive balance is going to come out of it. I don't know if the kids win in this model that we currently have, if they win long term. Like long term, when we have to cut sports and cut other things, are the kids going to be the winners of this? I don't know. College sports been around a long time and given many an opportunity. And by all means, I want these kids to make money. But what's going on right now is not good for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that's a really serious statement. In almost any situation, you're going to have some winners and some losers. Like, there's no decision that college athletics can make that sort of makes everybody into a winner and everybody's going to win equally because, unfortunately, you've got some athletes within football who just have sort of a higher market value than others. And you've got, football as a sport that just sort of has a higher market value than other sports. And so the question kind of always comes down to, well, who do you want your winners and your losers to be? Do you want a system that benefits the very best athletes? If so, some of the athletes at the bottom rung of the ladder, they're just going to simply go away. Or do you want a system that kind of benefits sort of athletes on kind of a more level playing field? Well, in that particular case, your very best players at the highest level of the most important sport, football, they're going to probably be underpaid. That you sort of have to choose who do you want your winners to be and who do you want your losers. It sort of seems like that's obvious. I think Smart's right when he kind of points that out. I think he's also right when he describes just how kind of crazy this situation has been for coaches, kind of in the post-NIL, pre-House world where, I mean, as I said, it's not, unfair to sort of say this has been a little bit like the Wild Wild West. In fact, in that same press conference, he went into even more detail about just how challenging it is right now to sort of figure out, what you can pay guys, what other programs are sort of promising, and how you make sense of any of this. Smart talked more about that back in April.
No, nobody does that. I think they want that. Okay, deep down inside, that might be in their back of their mind. And ultimately, that's the goal of it's human nature. I think players have value and they should be rewarded for that value. But at the expense of what? At the expense of us having 3 or 4 sports that can't do anything and support anything? So because they get the television revenue and because they raise it, should they get first dibs on all that and us not have other sports? I don't think that's right. And there's a balance to be had. But no, I don't think kids come and I don't have kids come in. If they come in and say that, then I'm going to listen to them and talk to them, but I'm scratching them off the list. I'm over that because if that's all that matters, then you need to send out a bid like they do for jobs and say, supplement your bid. Let me take visits and just I'm going to go to the bid and go to the highest bidder. That's I really believe there still does matter a relationship. And if relationship doesn't matter, then I'm probably not going to have a kid that wants to play hard for Georgia, right? So relationship matters, work ethic matters. Do you want to be great? Do you have fire, passion, and energy? I'll pay for that. I'll pay a premium for fire, passion, and energy because in the market we're in, There's a lack of that. Kids are going to struggle the next 10 years when they look back and somebody says, I'm going to go back, introspect, I'm going to look at this and say, what happened to the kids that went to 2 and 3 and 4 places? I will assure you, we will not be happy with where those kids that jump for greener grass went to. And I think the portal's a good thing for a lot of kids that are 3rd, 4th, 5th year, but it also gives you a way out that I don't think is good for kids right now.
So when you listen to Kirby Smart, it's fairly obvious that he's betting, to go back to what I said earlier about all of this kind of coming down to a pretty big bet, Smart is betting that the House settlement and the Deloitte clearinghouse, the NIL scrutiny, that it's going to have some real teeth, and that people want some of these what might be described as sort of like outlandish NIL payments to players who've never even played a down of college ball before. They want that to go away. They want college athletics as we've known it, not just football, but the other sports too, to be preserved, to be maintained, and that the House settlement is a good thing because it's going to fix some of this. That's the bet it seems like Kirby Smart is making. You hear him use the word cap a lot. He said that in one of the clips we played a moment ago. He said that pretty frequently. When the cap hits, the cap hits. When we get the cap, Kirby Smart describes it as a cap. It sounds like, based on the words and the clips we just played and previous clips we've played over the course of the last couple of months, that Smart is sort of counting on the after effect of the House settlement to be a little bit like a salary cap. And we get the impression through circumstantial evidence that the other SEC teams sort of feel the same way, that all of the SEC teams, according to reporting that's been out there, have signed a document to say their athletic departments will abide by the House settlement, even if their state laws would allow them to kind of go rogue. For instance, we sometimes think of Tennessee in this regard with what happened with Nico Imalileva, what's happened with some of the other challenges to eligibility and things like that. If there is a rogue program in the SEC right now, it's actually probably more so Tennessee than even like a Texas, who you might think of being that way. It's actually kind of been more Tennessee as of late. But they have even said they're going to sign the agreement. The SEC in total unity, they plan on abiding by the tenets put forth by the House settlement. They believe that there's going to be a new landscape ushered in by the basic procedures put forth by this House settlement. All of a sudden now, NIL may be kind of reined in a little bit. That is the bet the SEC appears to be making. Here's the thing we need to understand, though. There are people on the other side who are going to make a very different bet. Now, you may say it's going to be Oregon because of Nike money, or it's going to be Miami because of the Ruiz. Is that guy, the booster from NerdWallet? Not NerdWallet, whatever the company's called, LifeWallet, whatever it's called. LifeWallet. Is that what it is? Whatever their big booster is down there, it's going to be Miami who challenges this, or it's going to be one of those Big Ten schools who challenge this. Somebody's going to challenge this. And honestly, those may be the usual suspects. They may be, or maybe Texas Tech now, because Cody Campbell all of a sudden has got these billions of dollars and he's got some newfound power. Maybe Texas Tech wants to challenge all of this. Well, whoever it is outside the SEC, you can best believe that the bet they're going to make is this House settlement is essentially just a piece of paper. And not to go all Andrew Jackson on you, but Claudia Wilkin may not exactly have an enforcement arm for the judgment that she has rendered, and that somehow this piece of paper is not going to shake itself free from a manila folder and stop anybody if they want to just keep right on making NIL payments, essentially glorified pay for play at exorbitant rates, just like they've been doing for the last couple of years, because ultimately in a court of law, they would likely win. That any true attempt to limit compensation is a legal challenge destined to be lost by whoever really wants to try that, no matter what the House settlement says. Now, if this is true, and if the SEC is betting on the House settlement working, and if Kirby Smart, among the most forceful on this, kind of betting on this working, and some of the rogue, well-moneyed programs kind of outside the SEC making the opposite bet, here's the consequence. Whichever side loses is going to be far behind. whichever side loses is going to have a lot of ground to make up. For instance, I think that the Kirby Smart SEC perspective is for a lot of these programs who've only been offering compensation, who don't have much more to offer other than compensation, once compensation is limited, then they're going to have to evaluate what they haven't been making promises, whether it be whatever else the college experience can offer. They're going to have to evaluate what they haven't been providing. And when they don't have the easy button of, we'll just pay you twice, whatever so-and-so school wanted to pay you, then that's going to be a real problem for those schools. But the flip side is if you're Georgia or if you're another one of these SEC schools and you've taken a somewhat conservative approach to the NIL payments because you believe eventually it just sort of has to be reined in because it can't go on, it's, to use a word they like to use, unsustainable to keep operating this way, what if you turn out to be wrong? What if you turn out to be wrong and this House settlement doesn't actually create the sort of barrier against wild pay for play the way that a lot of people, including Kirby Smart within the SEC, hope that it does? That's the battle lines here. And I've told you before, I'm a lot more optimistic about reining in the transfer portal than I am reining in the compensation part of this. Unless you get some help from the federal government, I don't know that you're going to get what you want from this. I'd love to tell you that, hey, it's a new era and it's all good for Georgia. But the honest truth is that the House settlement thing that came out on Friday is probably just the next step in all of this. It's probably about to be seriously challenged by people who want to keep pay for play the way that it is, and the recent legal precedent suggests those people might win. Clearly, Kirby Smart's got a perspective. Clearly, he and a lot of his SEC brethren have a way in which they wish the world worked. I don't know they're going to get their wish in this regard, though. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We're glad you're with us. No matter how you get to us, video 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960F, podcast, Apple, Spotify, all kinds of ways for you to connect with our program. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube right now, it'd help us out a lot. I don't quite understand the algorithm on this, but apparently it does. Give us a like, do that. It kind of lets people know that you enjoy the show. And I guess YouTube is willing to share it then with more people. So we certainly appreciate you doing all of that. And just really thanks for watching. I mean, the main thing we ask for you is just watch the show. We try to do a good show. We assume if you like it, you'll watch it and you may tell some other people about it. And ultimately, that probably matters more so than anything else. By the way, huge thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making the show possible, too. It's been a busy spring and summer for Pella, and they're out and about with the community again here coming up this upcoming weekend. How about at the Monroe Flower Festival? First of all, Monroe, one of the prettiest parts of the state. Probably doesn't get enough credit for how pretty it is. The Monroe Flower Festival coming up this Saturday, June 14th. You can come out and hang out with the folks at Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and you can learn all about what makes the Pella product such a huge upgrade for your home when it's time to make that upgrade on your windows. It's energy efficient. They're Energy Star approved, after all. Coveted, designation there on that. This time of year when you kind of got that AC pumping, you want to keep that cold air inside your house. You don't want it escaping out of the house because that just makes everything more expensive. You're wasting money at that point in time. The Pella windows prevent that from happening. You'll be more comfortable on the inside of your house. Your energy bills are going to go down. You love all of that. And you can take advantage of great savings right now, too. How about $750 off your project and 0% APR for 36 months? Great way to take advantage of some great savings from Pella Window and Door of Georgia. It's awesome window technology. In many cases, you got like the shades of the blinds sort of built into the windows. So it's a really cool looking product. It looks great on the outside of your home, feels good on the inside of your home. That's what Pella is all about. So check them out online. It's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. PellaGA.com/DawgNation. You can also give them a call, 678-638-1429. One more time on that, 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is going beyond. All right, so we're so happy to have Pella as a part of our show each and every day, but also happy to have all of you with us here today as well. Coming up in just a little bit, it's Jon Stinchcomb. John's a really smart guy. So I think one of the things we'll enjoy speaking about with Jon is some of what I just laid out. The belief, I think, of those within the SEC that this House settlement's going to work and it's going to make things a little more normal, kind of get back to normal. The very strong belief from certain pockets around the country that's not what they want. They're going to challenge this at every turn. They're going to try to utilize NIL to kind of catch up and truly level the playing field. We're going to talk to Jon Stinchcomb about that more in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go around the DawgHouse. It's presented today and poured by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And let's talk some Georgia recruiting here for a moment. Now, it was a very busy weekend for Georgia with official visitors. Jeff Sintel's story coming up later on today at DawgNation.com, chronicling some who were there, the movement that Georgia made with some of those guys. Also, you had Georgia, prospects and strong Georgia targets taking visits elsewhere here this weekend. Kamari Brooks at Alabama, for instance. So there'll be plenty discussed about all of that in the time to come. But I want to focus for just a second here on a guy that was a huge story last week, the brother of the former Alabama All-American Minkah Fitzpatrick, Justice Fitzpatrick, now at St. Thomas Aquinas down in South Florida. He made his pledge to Georgia. This was a big recruiting win. Admittedly, on the show, we said this out loud. Boy, anytime one of these things kind of pops up out of nowhere, kind of makes you wonder how deep the roots of the commitment really run. We did say that, to be frank. But it was nonetheless a very big recruiting win for Georgia. And on Friday, when we talked about this very big recruiting win, thought that Jeff Sintel kind of gave some interesting insight on the specific ramifications for why this sort of elite, top 3 type rated cornerback in the country choosing Georgia, why it might be such a big deal. This is what Jeff Sintel said about Justice Fitzpatrick on Friday.
Is very quickly on the slide, 2 things are happening. Dante Williams is notching up wins on the recruiting trail when there was not many of those in his first year at Georgia. And number 2, Brandon, this was a guy that Miami wanted. Miami and its millions wanted. And this was a guy that was in the backyard of South Florida as well. But, Brandon, I don't know if you caught this. I'm going to give credit to Hayes Fawcett and On3 for their graphic when he made their commitment. But he said he's ready to go to war at the University of Georgia. And when that is a potential future starting member of that Junkyard Dogs defense, you got to like that.
So there you go. Big win for Dante Williams. You go down to South Florida. You got big spend in Miami. Who wants this guy? But Georgia just goes in there and takes him away from the Miami Hurricanes, pulls him right out of South Florida. And Fitzpatrick telling a major national website, I'm ready to go to war with Georgia, ready to go to war for Georgia. But apparently, according to some recent reporting, just prior to going to war with UGA and fighting a battle on behalf of the Dogs against the rest of these college football enemies of UGA, just before I go to war, for Georgia and with Georgia, just prior to going to war, let me take another visit to Ohio State. Hayes Fawcett, who Jeff mentions, has new reporting out there on Justice Fitzpatrick. Elite 2026 cornerback Justice Fitzpatrick will take an official visit to Ohio State this weekend. He tells me for On3 recruits. So this coming out from Hayes yesterday for this upcoming weekend. According to that reporting, Justice Fitzpatrick will go to Ohio State. Now, here's what I can tell you, just having followed this for a long time. My guess is that Georgia will do everything it can to prevent Fitzpatrick from taking that visit. I don't mean imprisonment. I mean, coercing him and convincing him. You don't want to go to Columbus. It's cold there during the winter. Ugly uniforms. You don't want to go there. You want to stay right where you are here at Georgia. Kirby Smart knew how to use Minkah Fitzpatrick. He'll know how to use you. No one's going to get more out of you than we are. We're the home for you, and that very well may likely happen. That Ohio State apparently had enough of an inroad with Fitzpatrick. There was reporting at the national level that the Georgia commit will visit Ohio State this weekend. That's real enough to get that mention here. But there's also a thing in recruiting is once the news becomes public, all of a sudden now it mobilizes the forces elsewhere. And so I can promise you that Georgia's forces will be mobilized here to try to prevent Fitzpatrick from taking that visit. And even if he takes the visit, I guess he could still land at Georgia. Sometimes that happens. But if you're a Georgia fan or if you're a Georgia coach, you clearly don't want Fitzpatrick, fresh off a Georgia commit, taking an official visit somewhere else so soon after. That would not be a good thing, even if it's not necessarily a calamity. It would not necessarily be a good thing. So there's a very good chance that Georgia can prevent Fitzpatrick from taking that visit. But boy, the reason why we mention this here is this is the thing that I hear. Like when I talk to like regular fans, this is the thing they talk about almost as much as anything. Like the coaches talk about what Kirby Smart said in the clips we played to begin the show. They're concerned about the outlandish NIL payments, and they're concerned about, the roster uncertainty from the two different transfer portal windows. They're concerned about all of that. But to the average fan, there's an element of, fair or not, don't tell me about the birth pains, just show me the baby. In other words, they don't care how the sausage is made. They just want to follow college football and have some expectation that things are going to operate the way they have in the past. And one of the things that I hear from a lot of Georgia fans, and I don't know if other college football fans feel this way too, I'm assuming they probably do, but Georgia fans in particular is, man, recruiting ain't what it used to be. And if you're not a Georgia fan, that sort of sounds like sour grapes because your team didn't get so-and-so player or might lose so-and-so player. But the truth is, I don't care how good Georgia's been, that sort of stuff has been happening forever, time immemorial, or whatever the phrase is. That stuff's been happening, forever. You've always, anytime a player flips away from your school, it's always been boy, these kids today don't know the meaning of the word commitment. But on the flip side, when you flip somebody else, that's the kid making the decision he should have made right along. So there's always been an element of that. But what's going on now with fans sort of feels different. It's almost like they've become, is it nihilist? Is that how you say that? Nihilist? Is that what that word is? Where you just don't really believe in anything? It's like a lot of fans have just sort of lost their belief in anything when it relates to the recruiting process of, so-and-so enjoyed his official visit. I don't care, blah, blah, blah. So-and-so committed to Georgia. I don't care. That doesn't mean anything anymore. It's amazing how much negativity exists around the idea of recruiting. And what I'm going to tell you as somebody who, sort of cares about this is one of those sort of underlying problems that kind of, I just don't think that people kind of realize how much the passion around college football is sort of fueled by fans who also follow recruiting. That's kind of been the thing that sort of powered college football's popularity. And I'm telling you right now, there are a lot of fans who are not really quite so sure what their relationship with recruiting is anymore, which I don't know. Maybe that's all talk, but boy, it doesn't seem like it's quite all talk. So for a story like this involving Justice Fitzpatrick, obviously as a Georgia fan, we want to see Georgia hold on to the commitment here and keep the good player in the class. But there's also an element, we're just sort of rooting for the recruiting process to still matter, because there are a lot of fans who are wondering, does any of this mean anything anymore? And that's around the DawgHouse. It's poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, let me tell you what does mean something. Well, always means something to me. That's the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. I love it. It's a big part of my summer. I told you before, it's my treat for every day when our show comes in. It's like the first thing I'm running to sort of get that pick-me-up and get sort of juice back up again. Good Dr. Pepper. I love Diet Dr. Pepper. This summer, a lot of folks are loving that brand new flavor from Dr. Pepper, the Blackberry, and the Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar. So many fun flavors to try. Dr. Pepper's got 23 original flavors that go to create the great taste that you've loved for a long time, and special new flavors being introduced all the time as well. When it comes to Dr. Pepper and DawgNation Daily, it's a pepper thing. We love having them around the DawgHouse. We're so happy to have them as a part of our show each and every day. We're also happy to have our next guest as a part of the show here today, too. For everything going on around college football right now, including a brand new landscape post-house settlement, we'll ask Jon Stinchcomb to put his legal hat on right now for that and a lot more. Here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Jon Stinchcomb. So, John, I want to talk to you about the House settlement thing, but let me kind of do just a second what I was just saying a moment ago. Look, ultimately, all recruits are going to do whatever they're going to do, be it Justice Fitzpatrick or anybody else. But when I talk to like regular fans, the stuff they complain about more than anything is I used to love following recruiting, and now I'm just not quite so sure it means anything anymore. That's the thing I hear from fans almost more than anything else. Like the transfer portal and the NIL stuff is a little bit frustrating, but that sort of impacts the quality of life, I would say, of coaches, maybe more so than fans. This thing of, well, if so-and-so takes a visit, does it really mean anything? Or if so-and-so commits, does it really mean anything? And to a degree, there's some of that that's sort of always been true, but the way in which you hear about it now, anecdotally, based on my personal experience, is just so different. Is that the kind of thing that you also notice too? And if so, what do you think it means?
I think it's been this way for the better part of a decade plus. You look at, last minute flips and that sort of thing. They've existed for a long time now. And to attribute it just to NIL and, this next generation, I think is a little bit naive. I mean, it's existed for a long time. And, it's a frustrating part of the game as a fan. I think part of it is Georgia's been the top of the heap. And we've been able to get a top 3 recruiting class for so long that there's a little bit of a spoiled attitude where it's like, well, we should get all the 5-star guys. And in this particular cycle, there's been a couple that have come along that we missed on or weren't able to cash in on. And, that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek phrase just because most of that points back to, well, other programs are paying them more money. Yeah, that's right. They are. And as the landscape change, you either adjust or you die. And I think Georgia's done a great job of adjusting to how the landscape has changed. And I think that probably leads in pretty well to a discussion about this House settlement.
Yeah, so you're a smart guy. You're a business-oriented person. You're also a football-oriented person. So you're kind of an interesting person to talk to about these subjects where the business and the sport kind of intersect. What I said a little earlier, and I'm curious if you think I'm right, and if you don't, I hope you'll say that I think what comes next is sort of tantamount to a big bet. That Kirby and the SEC is sort of betting on tradition in some form prevailing, and that what they might describe as outlandish NIL payments now going away, and you kind of bring some of this sort of back in line a little bit more. And I think outside the SEC, whether it's Texas Tech, Oregon, Ohio State, Miami, somebody, USC maybe, no matter who it is, I think others are perhaps going to bet that, well, actually, nobody's going to really stop us from making whatever payments we want to make, whether they are outlandish or not, outlandish always kind of being in the eye of the beholder. And that, if these SEC schools, if Kirby Smart wants to put his faith in this House settlement, then by the time he realized that was a mistake, we've going to acquired so much talent that the advantage the SEC once had has now been lost. That's what I think this is. It's sort of a bet on whether this House settlement, as it's been described to us, will work or not. Do you agree with that premise?
I agree with the premise that what we need to find out is who's got the teeth. And if it's this committee that's saying any third-party direct-to-player agreement that's greater than $600 is going to come under scrutiny for fair market value, that no longer can a booster basically buy a player to have them come play for their team, that's going to be put to the test pretty quickly, I'd imagine. And, I think you look at the House settlement has offered this $20 million purse for each team to spend, not team, organization, athletic department to spend from, and how they break that out to football and every other sport. It sounds like it's up to each school. So I think that part stabilizes. I think the biggest question is those third-party, direct-to-player, fair market value NIL deals. That the first one that says no, that's not fair market value. Then what's the response there? Because the expectation is all teams that are underneath that House settlement are agreeing to these terms, and who's going to be the first to buck and say, you know what, that's you have unfairly eliminated a deal that we are trying to present one of our players that sure it could have an impact as to whether or not they come here, but it's unjust and unfair. And what's that response going to look like? So I think that's where some of the eyes should be directed as to, is there real teeth? Is there real repercussions for those teams? Are we all playing under those same guidelines, or is it kind of feckless that you may say you don't like it, but it's going to be business as usual in recent years, where we can pay and buy and create these ethereal mystery deals for players and continue to recruit based on the almighty dollar from a third party.
Yeah, because like the phrase, and obviously I have two biases. And when I have a bias, I try to make them very clear. I'm obviously pro-Georgia. I'm also sort of pro-tradition. So I'm rooting for both Georgia and tradition. It does it's interesting that those two things are somewhat aligned in this case, because then Kirby Smart would sort of argue on the side of tradition. So I'm sort of rooting for Georgia and rooting for tradition, and I don't try to hide that. I've never tried to confuse people about where my perspective is coming from. But I do have to be honest that one of the things that Kirby Smart, a word that he uses a lot, he even used it in one of the clips we played earlier, is the idea of a cap. And to me, this is a little bit sort of speaking past the sale of Kirby Smart's trying to speak into existence the idea that there is a salary cap in college football. Honesty compels me to admit that's not necessarily true. There is a revenue sharing cap. I believe it's $20.5 million. I think that's the right number of how much schools can spend up to $20.5 million of their revenue on athletes. There is a cap on that, but in theory, there is no salary cap in college football of how much money can be spent on athletes because of the availability of NIL. And so, the prorated portion that football gets of the $20.5 million is not really a salary cap, because we know there will be additional money other than just the revenue payments from the athletic department itself. And I'm of the belief that some of that could still be sizable. And if Jackson Cantwell or Mark Bowman or one of these recruits that's supposedly getting $2 or $3 million per year, or we've heard like a $8 million guaranteed contract over 3 years, well, based on our level of understanding, post July 1st, Deloitte would probably not approve that as fair market value for an incoming freshman without some sort of, tangible NIL sort of exchange for that. But if they were to go to court and challenge that, based on the precedent of the last decade, it seems like the athlete would probably win. Am I missing something here on this?
Yeah, I think we're going to figure out what goes under that cap, if you will, inside that 20.5 million or 16 million for the football team. And I don't know that to be the exact number for Georgia. That's what's been floated around for a number of football teams across the SEC. If that's the number, if you're dealing with 16 million and you can only slice that so many ways for the 103 or 105 players on your roster, then you're looking at who gets what and who can get those deals outside of that cap, right? So, your quarterback is going to be more marketable. And I think that's where this nebulous uncertainty comes is, you're saying it like a guy like Jackson Cantwell. If his number, and I don't know this to be true, but if it's $2 million a year, how much of that is coming under the cap and how much of that is directly between him and a specific company, and not just part of a collective that kind of gets absorbed back into the athletic department and part of that 20.5 across the athletic department? Which players can you say are marketable in a reasonable way that Deloitte and this committee will authorize? And it's yet to be determined, because we haven't seen the first one come through, whether or not they just say no or give you a number in response, like, we think this guy's fair market value is this for this company. and it gets pretty ugly pretty quick. So I'm not exactly sure how it all plays out. I think it'll be interesting as it does, but there is still so much uncertainty when it goes outside of the athletic department agreement and those direct contracts, that true name, image, likeness, not just booster paying for a player to come play a part of a team and the money goes to wherever it's supposed to. We're talking about specific players that can be marketable for a company, and they're using it as they're supposed to, at least as it's determined by Deloitte and this committee. So I think it's going to be fun to watch because there's going to be some complaining bodies across the board. I do think this helps. I do think the House settlement helps. I think it brings it back in check for the majority, but we're talking about players that are on the fringe, and that's who Georgia goes after. Georgia goes after the top 5% of the talent nationally, whether it's in the recruiting portal or coming out of high school. So that's those are the ones that will have the biggest bark and the loudest bark in this argument. What's funny, BA, is when you talk about the House settlement, who House is?
Is it a track athlete? No, Swimmer. Okay, yeah.
Grant House, swimmer from Arizona State. Right. So this entire settlement is not about a football player.
Yeah.
It's about, the equality and fairness of any player being able to profit off his name, image, and likeness. And the name in the suit is that of a swimmer from Arizona State.
That's really interesting.
Isn't it? Because, now we've got a softball player who's making $1 million a year when most softball programs across the country are operating on a budget that's probably around that figure and probably operating at a loss. So it's kind of a squirrely world, and you hope that this settlement allows it to stabilize, not just for football, but across all sports.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about some version of that here to conclude our conversation in a minute. But you mentioned quarterback. Let me tell you what my sort of crackpot opinion is of something that could work, and you tell me how half-baked you think this is. In a world in which you have revenue payments directly from the athletic department and space for NIL, as long as theoretically anyway it's approved as fair market value, I wonder if we could see a situation moving forward for Georgia and everybody where the quarterback is paid almost exclusively outside of the outside of the revenue sharing world through NIL. And that leaves your salary cap going to somebody else. Because here's what I can tell you, without getting too into the details here, I have a decent idea of what some Georgia players have been paid for some of the NIL deals they've been a part of. And it truly is what I would describe as sort of a fair market value of just having been around media. Okay, you got paid X number of dollars to endorse so-and-so. That's about what I've heard, pretty consistent. However, I do know this as well, that if you had tried to call so-and-so quarterback, including the one here at Georgia, offered a similar deal to that quarterback, you probably would not have gotten a call back. And I can say that pretty confidently, that you might not have gotten a call back offering the same deal to a quarterback. Quarterbacks were just living and have been living in just a different world in terms of not the pay for play, but the actual NIL compensation. Bigger companies just willing to spend more money on quarterback than they are other positions. So therefore, you could pay the quarterback the millions through the NIL deals because that's kind of what quarterbacks are worth on the sort of fair market value world. Which then, okay, well, if you want to have the Mark Bowman or the Jackson Cantwell, or if you want to keep the junior player who's kind of the same version of that kind of player at some sort of outlandish price, well, maybe you can give him a larger portion of your salary, of your revenue sharing cap, because we're trying to get the quarterback to sort of take the money somewhere else through NIL. And the NFL guys are restructuring contracts and things all the time. So, it would certainly be in the quarterback's best interest to say, I'll take my money outside the cap. That way it'll leave more money in the cap. So I'll have some guys to throw to, some guys to protect me. in the NFL, guys make decisions like that all the time. We're led to believe that Brock Bowers may have done something like that while he was here or there. It's not unheard of. It's not unheard of to think about more than just the amount of money you can make, because you need 10 guys out there to keep you from getting killed. So I think that there could be a potential remedy in, what if we always just paid the quarterback outside the revenue sharing and left the revenue sharing for the other players? Does that make it a little easier to accomplish some of this?
Well, I think we've already seen it, and you've already hit on the two spaces, on the two sides of this, where Georgia specifically, I don't know the exact numbers. I do know this to be true. So Brock Bowers publicly states, I'm not going to take money from the collective and allow those funds to go to the other guys. So any of his deals, at least he claimed, were coming from third party. I have no reason to believe that that's not the case. So that's almost identical to what you're describing. Instead of collective, we've changed terms, and that's the rev share for the athletic department. That's basically they're switching spaces. So this is pooled money that gets spread out among the masses. And for those players that can say, I can go outside of that pooled money, get deals directly, and allow the funds that I otherwise would have claimed to go to the rest of the guys, that's a great thing for the program. Brock was willing to make that. Carson was not. And he claimed some of those funds. It was one of the reasons why he was able and willing to come back to Georgia rather than go to the NFL draft. Now, that seems like a funny conversation now, considering he's re-upped and gone to Miami and still in the college ranks. But part of that is because he's able to demand those funds. So would it be easier? Could you retain players, recruit players, spread those funds underneath the rev share better if you could identify? Obviously, the quarterback is an easy one. The top 2, 3, 5 for some programs, either positions or names, and say, if we can fund this player and the agreed upon amount outside of that rev share, that would absolutely create more space for guys to be a part of this team. And there's better ways to cut the apple that you have to share when you're talking about the athletic department rev share, $20.5 million across all players. So all teams are doing that. Now, with that said, is it easier to find deals in Starkville, Mississippi, or Los Angeles, California?
Yeah.
I think that's going to be with that unfair leverage that some teams can make. And I don't know how you would change that and regulate that, other than saying, yeah, you're right. It is going to be easier to create a market for a player in Los Angeles or in the suburbs of Atlanta than it would Starkville, Mississippi. I hate to pick on them, but
Sure.
Come on. So you look at it and say, that's very much the case. I think every team is looking at it saying, how much of the commitment that we make to these players can be outside of that rev share, where we can get legitimate direct deals that don't pull from the pool.
So I'm going to talk more about this in a moment, but let me finish with you, giving you a chance to address it too, which is ultimately one of the main reasons I'm somewhat pessimistic about the House settlement really working the way that some want it to is I think the NCAA is trying to get off too easy. I think they're trying to earn themselves a win without having to argue on behalf of their cause. And you mentioned the thing a moment ago about, like, say, swimmers or softball or things like that. Like, to me, the argument on behalf of college athletics is, what do we want this to be? Do we want to pay football players what they're worth? Because if that's the case, then softball might have to go away. And Olympic sports will definitely, in many cases, have to go away. And college athletics just seems really afraid of kind of laying out the brass tacks of, this is reality. This is how the world works. What do you want it to be? Because simultaneously, it seems like, and this is a different topic for a different show, is that college athletics gets criticized for sort of being not capitalistic enough when it comes to how it treats football players, but too capitalistic for how it treats the other sports. But if college athletics were to rightly argue its cause here, it's, we can't pay these football players what you think they're theoretically worth and then have the same pool of money to also pay the Olympic sport so everybody gets to feel good and everybody gets to wear a gold star. We can't do both. So what do you want it to be? Do you want this to be a business, built around college football, or do you want this to be a, intercollegiate entity that sort of supports all sports? Because it can't really be, fully both at the same time. But honestly, I'm not quite so sure that anybody who we sort of think of as the NCAA, I'm not quite so sure they've got the guts to make that argument because I think they're afraid of criticism. What do you think?
I don't think they have the power anymore. I think they have let it slip away. And any decision that would have been rational should have been made a couple decades ago. And now they realize that they have a foot in each pool, one of capitalism, where players that are making money for someone else to benefit from, they're going, hey, we want a part of that. And then the other foot stays in this socialist concept of we're going to pool and it's going to be better for everybody, which allows for space for student athletes that's not based on money. And that's the college athlete model has been that way forever. There's usually, there's some schools, Stanford has 30 plus teams, 30 plus sports that they can fund for. They're not profitable, but it allows them to give a collegiate opportunity for folks that otherwise might not have that. And that's been lauded of like, that's a great thing. I think it is. I think you look at, for Georgia, 21 sports. That means we've got the opportunity for student athletes that otherwise could not be at the University of Georgia to have those opportunities because football, because it brings in enough revenue that you've spread it out and you've given 550 student athletes an opportunity to be a scholarship athlete at the University of Georgia. That's awesome. If you're saying we're going to have to take that money and put it elsewhere, that for football players who you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth and say, I want what I deserve. I want my money because I'm a part of building this machine. I get that argument. And then also say, hey, don't blame me when you cut 4 sports that are not profitable. Well, the money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's just grossly naive to think that you can have both and play both. And now, back to your original point, I don't think the NCAA is in a position to make any of those decisions anymore. What's been used to be assumed by players, assumed by coaches, assumed by parents that, the NCAA is this powerful entity that you can't go up against. They've proven time and time again in the court of law that we're just going to sue you because what you're doing is not right. There's not a law that substantiates it. Whether it's right or wrong doesn't matter. You're not backed by the law. So in this very scenario, when we're talking about this $20.5 million, who's to say that there's not a softball player, a golfer, a track and field athlete that's going to go, nope, I think I deserve more of this cut. Not just talking about the high-end football player. No, let's go the other direction. The player that's saying, I should get more of that $20.5 million. So what's their alternative? Lawsuit. And so that's why I expect there's going to be lawsuits coming from every different direction possible because the NCAA continues to operate in a way that's, I hate to use the word cowardly, but I don't know of a better one to use. It's reactionary at the very best.
No, I think that's exactly right, Jon. Really smart stuff, strong commentary. Appreciate that. Always great to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Hope you have a great week. We'll look forward to our chance to hopefully get a chance to talk to you very soon here.
Hey, look forward to actually talking football at some point, BA, huh?
It'll be here at some point in time. We'll figure it out. Jon, great stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, buddy.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So I think that Jon said a couple of things there that are really important that I want to follow up on because I think a huge question around all this is, okay, what happens next? And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes responding to that here in just a second. Prior to that, let's go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And obviously, people enjoying their summer. When we think about summer, we think about a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And this summer is such an exciting one because it brings with it the debut of Star of the Seas, the newest Royal Caribbean cruise ship, the next in the Icon class of ships. And listen, I've heard from people, they've already kind of booked their travel on Star of the Seas. It's going to start sailing in August. What a fun time to be doing that. And there are people who are sort of already thinking about, okay, how about this time next year, my chance to be on Star of the Seas? And one of the things that, we're hearing are all of the things that Star is going to have that are perhaps similar to what Icon of the Seas had, in some cases some brand new things here too. It's just so much fun when you see all of the introductions that Royal Caribbean provides every time they bring one of these new ships to the fleet, and Star of the Seas is going to be no different. The special neighborhoods, like up on the pool deck, the hideaway area, which is kind of that adults-only enclave. If you like the Infinity Edge pool, if you like the kind of cool vibe of sort of looking out over the back of the ship and seeing the expanse of whatever port you might be in, or the ocean itself, you kind of got that. The special neighborhoods, right when you walk in the ship, the Royal Promenade's got the big pearl, a gorgeous, stairwell with it's kind of an amazing sort of icon that you just sort of walk in and see. It's maybe perhaps kind of where the name came from when you kind of walk in and see it. And of course, all of the spaces around the ship have just been magnified. And we know that Star of the Seas is going to be no different. In fact, Jessica Slater wants to tell you all about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll tell you all about the excitement of Star of the Seas and everything else going on with the Royal Caribbean right now. So find her today and book your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, whether it's Icon of the Seas, Star of the Seas, Utopia of the Seas. We'll be back on Utopia again in April for our DawgNation cruise once again in 2026. Just check it all out today. So Jon said an interesting thing a moment ago. He says that one of the reasons why the NCAA doesn't fight for its, to quote the Beastie Boys, why it doesn't fight for its right here on some of this is it doesn't quite have the power to do so anymore. I think power is a very interesting word in all of this because, what's the general from ancient Rome? Is it Cicero who said, "For my friends, everything. For my enemies, the law." And boy, it really seems like someone somewhere or something somewhere in the last 10 years, because I'm 40 whatever years old, for most of my life, the NCAA had it pretty easy. Somewhere in the last 10 years, and I think this is probably worth exploring for somebody. Somewhere in the last 10 years, the NCAA just sort of became the enemy of some force of power somewhere. Some sort of force of power somewhere. Just decided the NCAA is not good anymore. And boy, they have been dealt the law hard and good every year since then. For 150 years prior to that, from Teddy Roosevelt until present day, everything just swimming along perfectly for the NCAA. And they can't buy, literally, a win in court over the course of the last decade or so. And I think if you're the NCAA, I think you got to sort of kind of ask, what needs to happen for this to change? Not what legal remedy do we need to come up with. It's more along the lines of, how do we get on the good side of power once again? Because power, whether it be visible or invisible, has clearly aligned itself against college athletics. And what I was talking to Jon about is a perfect example of this. Do you know what a double bind is? A double bind is sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. When you are accused of not taking care of your football players on sort of individualistic, capitalistic grounds, but also not taking care of your other sports via Title IX on kind of collectivist socialist grounds, like that's a double bind. You got to pay the football players all they're worth, but you also have to pay the same amount of money to the other athletes in other sports, even if they're not worth that. Well, that's an impossibility. It's the sort of double bind that college athletics sort of finds itself dealing with all the time. And as I said before, there is no legal remedy for that, at least right now it doesn't seem, because the NCAA loses in court all the time. But it's worth pointing out, it didn't used to. There was a time it didn't used to lose in court. And the law, to my knowledge, I'm not a lawyer, but the law is not really different. Just the interpretation of that law seems to have changed a little bit. So I think if you're the NCAA, those are the kinds of questions you need to be asking, and they are not necessarily easy questions, nor do they provide easy answers. John said a moment ago, though, he'd also like to see us talking about football back here again. Well, let's give you a football story. This coming from Oregon, big-name wide receiver Evan Stewart. You know him, the former five-star, has sustained a knee injury. And I think there are varying opinions about how serious or not this may be, but it is at least a strong possibility that Oregon has now lost Stewart for the full year. This would be a big blow to an Oregon team who's kind of getting ready to do something a little different at quarterback. You know, last couple of years, they've gone sort of the transfer style veteran, whether it be Dylan Gabriel or, Bo Nix. A little bit of a changeover at quarterback coming for Oregon here, and a guy like Evan Stewart, receiver, certainly makes that an easier thing to accomplish. Well, now Stewart's status for the upcoming year is uncertain, and honestly, no matter who it is, when these star players this time of year kind of go down with injury, it always feels like that college football loses a little bit when one of these star players, steps away, but is injured and forced, to be sidelined. It seems like you lose a little bit because of that. We'll be watching this closely to see if this is of the more severe or less severe variety. But there's a chance that one of the big names for Oregon, as it tries to defend keep in mind now, Oregon's the Big Ten champs. Ohio State's the national champs. Oregon is the Big Ten champs. As Oregon tries to defend that status here this year, they may be without Evan Stewart as they do so. And we'll finish with this when it comes to baseball. A couple of things. First of all, we predicted that the Arkansas-Tennessee series would be a ton of fun for many and the kind of series that Chipper Jones sort of would hate. I think we probably got an accurate prediction there on that. But you also may have noticed there's been some criticism of the SEC because after getting 13 teams into the NCAA tournament, obviously a pretty disappointing run for the SEC overall. And here's all I'm going to tell you, and we'll wrap it up with this. One of the things that we do is we notice what other people notice. And when the SEC has had, national champions, is it 5 or 6 years in a row, half of the World Series, 50% of the World Series for what feels like the last, 10 years or so. It's interesting who never really seemed to notice that from kind of like the national sort of old guard media. Never really seemed to notice that, but somehow does notice when the SEC doesn't quite, replicate that same level of success, that this gets a mention from some of the national media when previous success perhaps didn't always get that mention. That SEC dominance is sort of treated as normal and therefore unremarkable. But when the SEC doesn't have a great year, and to be honest with you, I don't know this was a great year for SEC baseball, kind of the top end. I would say the Tennessee, the reigning champs, weren't as good as they once were, or were as good as they were a year ago. Georgia was certainly winning games, but those of us who were watching Georgia, even along their way to posting a national seed, resume, would say, this is a Georgia team that's kind of imperfect. There were a lot of very good but slightly imperfect teams in the SEC, perhaps not the best year in recent memory for the SEC. But in the 1 year in which the SEC doesn't replicate the percentage of teams it normally puts in the College World Series, remains to be seen if it will have a national champion. There's a very good chance that it still will. All of a sudden, you've got people who don't talk a lot about college baseball who seem very interested in college baseball when the SEC suddenly is not quite posting the same numbers it sometimes does. We reserve the right to notice what others notice. And when there are those who notice the SEC faltering, but don't seem to notice with equal measure the SEC thriving, we would say that maybe means something. We'll leave it for you to determine what it might mean, but we certainly think it might mean something, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we wrap up here today, great news to celebrate here. Our buddy Matt Rukavina, longtime commenter, one of our favorites, shares this with us. So you may realize that Nick Chubb, who suffered another very, very serious injury, has been working tirelessly to get himself back ready to play football again, and it seems like now that happens. Looks like Chubb's about to sign with the Houston Texans. This is thrilling news. Our guy Matt sharing that, saying, BA, this would be a great way to start tomorrow's show. We didn't start with that here today. We had the big news related to the House settlement, but how about we end with it? Nick Chubb, now a Houston Texan. Obviously, he'll have a Georgia presence down there. Kamari Lassiter, for instance, a part of that Texans roster. And the fact that Chubb, through all he's persevered through, continuing his football career, what an inspiring story that is. One of the easiest guys to root for you will ever see. We'll give both Nick and Matt golden shoes for that. Lousy, stinking Gators. It's easy to root against them. In fact, we love to be a Gator hater and tell you that it's been 1,675 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator hater updater. You'll have a great day. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do work that's promised, the price is promised. You can check them out today. I cannot get comfortable sitting here, but let's get some comments. On YouTube here for a moment. Oh, by the way, Jeffrey Collins shouts out Kamari Lassiter saying he's a beast. Yeah, it's amazing what Lassiter sort of turned out to be. Another one of these guys that was a good prospect coming out of high school, Tuscaloosa, of course. But this is another one of those guys, and Georgia's just been really good at this. And in the future world of revenue sharing, things like that, this is going to be a really valuable skill to have. It just seems like Georgia saw something in Kamari that even in the backyard of Alabama, they didn't always see in him. And he's turned out to be, I mean, this is one of the better young cornerbacks in the NFL right now. For sure, that's the case. Spencer Clark, speaking of another guy, similar situation. Eric Stokes, a Raider now. You love that. Miriam Corbin showing her love for Nick Chubb. By the way, Miriam over on the YouTube side of things here today. Let's see what else. Richie Bell says he's with Chipper Jones. Play the game, let the scoreboard do the talking. Yeah, I'm a little bit, I hate to talk out of both sides of my mouth, but like I'm entertained by Arkansas and Tennessee because of how not classy. I mean, like some of this is just not classy. It's just not classy. I am slightly entertained by how not classy it is. I've told you before, in the revenue sharing world we live in now, the last thing anybody who's in charge of college athletics wants is for college baseball to become more popular than it is. So it doesn't matter how packed these stadiums are. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. There is a lid on college baseball's popularity. Nobody wants it to be more popular than it is. And that's one of those things you either understand or you don't. That there is just a lid put on college baseball. You are as popular as you're allowed to be. And so because of that, college baseball goes a little unchaperoned at times. You have some wild stuff taking place in college baseball, and that makes it entertaining. So on one side of my mouth, I will say that. On the other side of my mouth, I will say that I am more so in line with Chipper Jones than not. I would say I'm more so in line. My instincts are more so in line with Chipper Jones. Somewhat viscerally, I am entertained by some of the antics you do see in college baseball, and there's way more of that than there is in major leagues. There's some of that in Major League Baseball. There is a lot of that in college baseball. I am entertained by it. I think the passion of college baseball makes it really fun. But I do think pride comes before the fall, and I think for a lot of people, a lot of players who are just like so sort of swagged out all the time, I would say that eventually that gets to be a little much. Kirby's belt, including encouraging folks to hit the like button. I certainly appreciate that. Let us see what else. Paul Moon says that he thinks that Dalen Everett might be having the Kamari Lassiter career arc, which is kind of a fun thing to consider. A very fun thing to consider, I would say. Let us see what else. Chef Jay Bowen says baseball is hard. That's one of the reasons why, because I do think baseball is hard. I mean, I do. I just think baseball is incredibly, incredibly hard. It's one of the reasons I would encourage a little more humility around the game because the game will humble you. And, I think, and listen, I obviously have a son who plays baseball, so I see a lot of this just from being around ballparks, things like that. It's like, the young guys, and my son's like this too, they want to emulate what they're seeing at like the college level. And I'm not saying that this doesn't go back to the old like Charles Barkley thing about being a role model. That's not what I'm talking about. But I do think for a sport that's already hard, when you also put the expectation, I need to play the sport with swagger, I think you've made the sport unnecessarily more difficult than it needs to be. I just do. I think the sport's hard enough as it is to say I must also succeed with style points. I would say that makes the sport more difficult than it needs to be. Foster Moss says he felt like I was B.A. Esquire today. So I joke about this a lot, Foster. I am not legally trained. I have watched a lot of courtroom dramas, watched a lot of TV and movies over the years that have taken place in courtrooms. I feel like I've learned from watching those things. I feel like I can use like legal phrases, some Latin. I feel like I can do some of that. So if I put a suit on and if I went to court, if I argued in front of a jury, I feel like I could go a few minutes before they would realize this guy might not be a lawyer. I feel like I could do a couple of minutes at least. I could play a lawyer in a TV show, perhaps. Kenneth Holt says professional golf, professional baseball, the two toughest sports to play. I could certainly believe those things. And here's what people don't realize about professional golf compared to other sports. Like, think about this for a moment. This is a very small thing, but it's really worth considering. If you get drafted into the NFL and week 1, if you're in Tampa Bay, the team flies you to Tampa. Have you ever noticed this before? The team flies you to Tampa. The team puts you in a hotel. The team makes sure you've got a meal before the game. Like, the team that you play for takes care of your needs for week 1 in Tampa. Do you know? You probably do. You may never have thought about this before. In the PGA Tour, or the 4 majors, run by entities outside the PGA Tour, you are on your own. No one flies you anywhere. No one puts you up. Like, if you get drafted in one of the 3 major team sports, Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, once you're on the team, your travel is their responsibility. They get you where you need to go. On the PGA Tour, it is your responsibility. So if you think about like a guy who goes through Korn Ferry and gets his card, that guy's making like $40,000 a year in his first year, which, that's not necessarily bad money for a young person. I'm just saying that, like, professional athlete not making millions or even 6 figures, he may earn that, but normally he's paying that money back to some benefactors who kind of set up what almost functions like an LLC around a PGA Tour golfer to help get them travel expenses to the tournaments they need to go to and the food they need to eat. And you got to drag around your swing coach, your sports psychologist, everything else. The hardest part of the PGA Tour for those just getting started is you got to find a way to get into tournaments, which if you don't have status is in some cases almost impossible to do. And you've got to pay your own way to get there. And like, once you win, all of a sudden now you kind of get ahead of the game a little bit. And now you can kind of pick your own schedule. You can start making some real money. But, when you first get started on the PGA Tour, you sort of operate like a small business almost. George on Tap says, kids trying to beat the Savannah Bananas, which I'm pro bananas, by the way, but I did think it was interesting this weekend. It's like, ESPN's like out on Major League Baseball. They're so far out on college baseball, even though they essentially have the monopoly on it. They're still basically out on college baseball, but all in on the Savannah Bananas, which is, I don't know. And I'm pro bananas. I mean, I like the bananas, but I would find that to be kind of interesting. D. Nelly mentioning the situation with Craig Kimbrell and the Braves, by the way. What a disaster that is. I said this the other day. I'll just be brief about the Braves. I mentioned this off the top of the show, too. We said the other day, because of how the Arizona series concluded, you lose 2-1, then you lose 11-10, you coughed up a big lead. For a Braves team that had mostly been scuffling along the way this year, be careful that it doesn't nosedive now. And boy, after getting swept in San Francisco, losing one game on a wild pitch, another game on a bullpen blow up after Kimbrell had been DFA'd, I would say in somewhat strange fashion. Just be real careful here. Real careful here. Savannah Bryan says what I just described is why Augusta National paid all of its pro entrants this year, not just those who made the cut, which is interesting. And not turn this into like a golf show, but this is also, and we've said this before, like this is the issue facing college football. The PGA Tour is a perfect example of this. When LIV attacked PGA Tour, it brought to light issues that have been simmering on the tour for a long time, which is for a while, the lower level tour players were getting a lot of money that the higher level tour players thought should be coming to them, which to somebody may sound like greed, but to them sounds like, hey, we're the reason that anybody watches these tournaments. And none of these guys are as popular as, like, say, Tiger Woods or Phil Mickelson would have been, but they're still the marketable players. And in some cases, I'm going to make up the numbers here, but you may have had like a top 10 player in the world only making like $14 million on the course, which only $14 million is an outlandish statement, but compared to other athletes in other sports, it's far lower. And golf's popularity is not necessarily far lower than some of these other sports, but the on-course payments to top players was significantly lower than the payouts to other athletes in their sports, even like, say, mid-level players, like the NBA, for instance. So the top tour players like, this needs to be different. And that's why they were willing to abandon the PGA Tour for LIV. LIV may have given them certainly contracts that did not represent fair market value, but their point was, I'd be a fool not to take this money given the fact that I'm not paid anywhere near what I'm worth on the PGA Tour right now. There are a lot of golfers who are making far more in endorsements than they were making in on-course earnings. And so in the future of college football, you get the same type of deal. It's like if you think about, 3-star safety who's just glad to be on the team compared to 5-star wide receiver who could have gone anywhere. In a world in which you're trying to agree as players of, hey, what should we collectively bargain for, to use the phrase that certain people seem to love. Like, these guys don't see the world the same way. They don't have the same interests. They don't have the same preferred outcomes. Like, what's good for one is not good for the other. And what's good for the current senior is not good for the future incoming freshman. And so that's why I've always sort of felt like the idea of collective bargaining is a little bit of a mid-wit take, the sort of thing that seems like an easy fix that's nowhere near as easy as people think that it is, because within the realm of college athletics, it's just far larger. Even if you just limit it to football, and even if you just limit it to sort of Power 4 football, or even if you just limit it to the players in the SEC and the Big Ten, it's still a larger pool than you kind of see existing in other sports. And you have wildly different preferred outcomes of those players. Bill Camacho says, how long do you think Kirby's going to have at Georgia? We are coming up on year 10 for Kirby. I would say after this year, and I hope it's not true, I hope he coaches for another 50 years. I would say after this year, it is entirely possible, one way or another, at the conclusion of this year, that the span of time that Kirby Smart has been Georgia coach will be longer than the span of time into the future that Kirby Smart will be Georgia coach. In other words, we may be in the second half of Kirby Smart's coaching career. We might be there now, but we certainly could be there at the end of this year for sure. So it is entirely possible that we have experienced more of Kirby Smart in the past than we will experience of Kirby Smart in the future. So do with that what you will, but I would suggest enjoy every moment while you have them. Jeffrey Collins says, I don't want Kirby to leave. We love Kirby. That's one thing that all Georgia fans are in agreement on. They want him to be there as long as he can. A nice conversation here led by our guy Paul Moon, looking back on some great former Dogs. And one of the things we do like doing around here is because there's been so much success the last few years, it kind of sucks the oxygen out of the conversation around previous eras. I think it's fun to remember, somewhat lesser known players from previous eras. Just make sure they kind of get their day in the sun. In fact, I was thinking about something along those lines. This isn't exactly the same thing, but I was thinking about this. You know how we do like Mount Rushmores and things like that? By we, I mean pretty much everybody who does the sports talk game. We've even, fallen prey to that from time to time too. Here's what I think would be a fun Mount Rushmore to do. And maybe we will do this. The Mount Rushmore of single season performances in Georgia football history. Because that's a different Mount Rushmore than your other stuff. Now you could say, well, Bowers and Herschel and guys like that might still be on there. Maybe that's the case. But I do think if we did a Mount Rushmore of single season performances, I think that's a little bit different conversation than the other sort of conversation we sometimes have. We may do that at some point. DT says, where does the NBA money come from to pay players $50 million a year? Their ratings are well behind college football. I think it's a very good question. And because you also see college basketball players being paid more than college football players in many cases. One of the things that I think the basketball players benefit from is it's a smaller roster. It's only 5 guys on the floor. There's only 12 guys on the team. And so therefore, you've got this pool of money that fewer players are sharing. Like one of the challenges related to football is that it's just a larger roster. NFL is 53. College football is about to be 105. You're just sharing the pool of money with a larger portion of players. It's just different. We've also lived in an era, going back to David Stern as NBA commissioner, where Stern sort of saw the light with, hey, his league was a league in which players weren't covered up by helmets, where you could sit down close to the court and you would see the facial expressions of the players. That created an opportunity for star making in basketball that didn't exist in football. And for those of you that collect cards, you know this, is that football is way more popular than basketball. But basketball cards have always been more popular than football. And people are always like making these big bets on, well, I'm going to buy, the Mahomes and the Brady rookies and the Jim Browns, because right now football, they say, is undervalued compared to basketball. But there's just a chance the basketball cards are just worth more, even though basketball is less popular than football, because that's sort of always been the case, at least in this sort of modern card market, that basketball players have a pathway to stardom that football players don't seem to have, even though football as a sport is far more popular. The other thing that goes on here is, and it's not necessarily a nebulous question of, how come the NBA generates so much revenue despite the fact the TV ratings are pretty miserable? This is something that college football needs to pay attention to, and I've said this before. What the NBA has is the potential for international appeal. That you have, the best players in the NBA are all international now. We are in a plague when it comes to American basketball right now. The NBA is dominated by foreign-born players, including SGA for Oklahoma City. This is just the worst era ever for American basketball. It's never been worse. A league totally dominated by foreigners. But the league, because of that, has a lot of appeal around the world. And when you look at, especially in the move towards the streamers, Netflix, Apple, Amazon, the streamers are seeking international audiences. Like if you go on Netflix, think about how much stuff you see on Netflix that is content that was actually from a different country. You may see like English overdubbed. You may see subtitles. Like there's a lot of international content already on Netflix. Netflix is a global platform. And the sports that Netflix seeks out are themselves global sports. For instance, people don't realize like how global like wrestling is now. Monday Night Raw is on Netflix now. Like the big lead up to WrestleMania, the big promo that John Cena cut for his match against Cody Rhodes, that wasn't like Allentown, Pennsylvania. That was literally Brussels, Belgium. That's literally where Raw was the night that Cena gave the big promo against Cody. That there's a chance in future years WrestleMania may be in London. That's what Netflix wants. It wants global sports. NBA, for better or worse, has global appeal. It potentially has greater global appeal than domestic appeal, potentially, although not there yet. College football has zero global appeal. There are expatriates that live in other countries that like college football, but, you're not going to have people in, Sao Paulo, Brazil watching College Game Day. You're just not going to have that. Other sports have that potential. The NFL, I think, wants every team to play one international game. College football does not have the same opportunity. College football is uniquely American. And so leaning into that, I think is important for college football moving forward. And, this idea that everything around college athletics is fine because the TV revenue keeps going up. Be very, very careful about that in the future. Be very careful about that in the future. Let me get some Facebook comments. On Facebook. Always takes me a while to load here on Facebook. Ever since we moved studios, my phone doesn't work quite as well in this building. All right, let me get a couple on YouTube while I pull up Facebook. Gary Roach says, I think that Fitzpatrick should have visited Ohio State before committing to Georgia, giving us false hope. Well, like I said, there's a really good chance that Georgia can prevent him. I say prevent, it makes it sound like they're going to, lock him in a room. Convince him is the word I'm looking for. They're going to convince him not to take the visit. Perhaps that's the case. But, I also will say that, and we said this on the show, is that when a commitment pops up that you weren't necessarily expecting, you got to be on guard for anything. So perhaps that was the right perspective to have all the time. Ralph Price says you're always going to have brown bags of cash. He means under the table payments. Teams are going to be competing with behind the scenes. He says that's something that's never going to change for the top talent. So I have an unpopular opinion. If we agree that players have a monetary value attached to them, and if we agree that the market is going to find a way to pay players what they're worth, I am of the belief that the theoretical brown bag of cash, the theoretical casino chips, McDonald's bags, whatever would have existed theoretically in an under-the-table world, which, by the way, I am not willing to stipulate did exist. But if it did, I am of the belief that's a better system than whatever this is. I do. If we were to stipulate, which I will not, but if we were to stipulate that payments under the table used to exist, I would suggest that is a better system than whatever this is. I do. I think so. It's sort of what's the thing you sometimes hear about, like, is it Chesterton's fence, where like you don't tear down a fence until you know why it was built to begin with. To me, the old school Wild West under the table world, if it did exist, maybe college football's version of Chesterton's fence of I think now we're finding out why those payments may have been under the table, for better or for worse. Ken Holcomb says the bullpen and the injuries are killing the Braves this year more than anything else. Traded away some great bullpen talent the last few years, and it's now catching up to us. So many close games lost after a good starting performance. Yeah, there has been a lot of that, no doubt about it. And that's why, like, ultimately the Kimbrel thing is not that big of a deal because he's late in his career, and it's kind of funny. People get mad when the Braves bring in kind of a, sort of a, like a, kind of an old familiar face. People think that's all the Braves can do. And then when they don't bring in Kimbrel, or at least choose not to keep him, people are also mad about that there as well. But some of the anger related to how the Kimbrel situation happened is just because of how bad the bullpen's been overall. Brian Whitaker says, I'm pretty sure the Braves have lost the most one-run games in the majors this season. It's so frustrating. Yeah, I believe that is true. There's also a chance that, close losses in both football and baseball have a tendency to stabilize over time. So maybe we'll see, especially for a long sample size season like baseball, maybe we'll see some of that stabilize at certain points. So maybe all hope is not lost. But ultimately, baseball is not played on an Excel spreadsheet. It's played on the diamond. And I just think this team's got to be in a bad spot mentally right now. They have just lost games every way you can lose them. Just the daily grind of showing up at the ballpark gets hard after a while. And so we'll see if they still want to do this at the same level. Randy Hall says, would I like to have my own trading card? Oh, you better believe I would. Now, we did do this for DawgNation like way back a long time ago. But they were oversized. They weren't like the 2.5 by 3s the way that the classic cards were. Not 2.5 by 3, whatever, 3.5 by 4, is that what it is? The classic card size. But I'd love to have that. There is a top set that comes out every year called Allen Ginter, and they do put like non-athletes in this set all the time. I have not arisen to the stature of getting a Allen and Ginter card, I don't believe. But I think I would rather have that than anything, including like retirement. I think I would just sort of give my whole life savings to be in a actual, print run of a top set. I believe I'd probably give that over anything. Barry Watkins says, instead of being a coach now, you've got to be the CEO every year. Financial side has become the most important aspect of football. Some old school coaches just will not put up with it much longer. Yeah. And Barry, it's almost like the version of what we used to see where, like, there was a time in which the old coach became the athletic director. Obviously, Georgia's an example of that with Vince Dooley. That's not the job of the AD anymore. ADs are almost exclusively fundraisers. It became a different job profile than the ex-coach. And I do believe the job of head coach is changing too, of, boy, you better have an understanding of how the negotiation part of this goes. Some sort of appreciation for how each roster decision fits in the overall pie, because I know in the past that some programs have overpaid for a player in a recruiting battle because eventually the ego just sort of kicks in. And like some of y'all have done eBay. Let's go back to cards for a second. Some of y'all do this on eBay where it's like, I want this. And now it becomes a little bit of a battle back and forth of raise your bid, raise your bid, raise your bid. At a certain point in time, you just don't want to lose. There have been some recruiting battles that almost certainly have become nonsensical bidding wars because ego just sort of kicked in. And you think, I want this player because I want him. And all of a sudden that just becomes the thing. I would say that in sort of a CEO world, the way that you describe, you can't do that. You got to have a price that, I like so-and-so up to this price, but not a nickel beyond that. Let us see what else. KC says at some point in time we need to stop worrying about Bama, Ohio State, and other schools when we lose players that don't want to be UGA Dogs. If they want to be here, if they don't want to be here, I don't want them. Yeah, but let's just be careful. I mean, like I said before, let's just be careful and see what happens here too. And like the one thing I will tell you about the coaches, just from observing this over the course of years, is they don't get their feelings hurt particularly easy. You know, this idea of, well, so-and-so flirted with taking a visit, in this case, perhaps to Ohio State. If those are the terms of engagement, then George is going to go to work to say, okay, well, what's Ohio State offering you? You know, what do you like about Ohio State? Here's what we can do to demonstrate why we're different than that. Like, that's just kind of what they do. Like football coaches cannot get their feelings hurt very easily if a recruit wavers on a decision. They just go to work and trying to prevent that from happening. And so in the case of Fitzpatrick, the news was what it was, and maybe he does take the visit to Ohio State. Maybe he ends up at Ohio State, which is where some people thought he was going to end up to begin with. There's also a chance he doesn't. I'm content to let it play out. Let's see what else. By the way, Brian Whitaker, going back to the WWE international crowds, like they really, especially the British fans, they bring the noise, man. And like a lot of the European fans do too. It's like when the crowd is really energized, there's usually a pretty large international contingent in the building. I would say I've also noticed that too, Brian. WrestleMania, for instance, the Raw after WrestleMania, all of that has very, very loud international fans. A little bit like what you see for like, if you ever watch like a British boxer, he's always got a big following. Was it like Ricky Hatton or somebody like that in the years past? There's a little bit of that vibe around wrestling these days. Barry Watkins predicting that Arch Manning's going to be successful this year and spike up the price for every quarterback going forward. You could see some of that. Becky Rutledge says she'd rather lose to anybody other than Ohio State. And Becky, I understand where you're coming from. Let us see what else. Paul Moon says we got to be realistic about the situation. He says, I'd love our roster to be only true Georgia guys, but we also need top players. We need those guys too. They're not always going to bleed red and black. I think Paul is right. I think of it as kind of a ratio. You know, you need about 85% of your roster to be salt of the earth, guys that you can trust, hard workers who just do a job. Like you need a certain blue collar, salt of the earth mentality to permeate like 85% of your roster. But if it's 100% of your roster, you may stop short of being as talented as you can possibly be. I do think you got to play with about 15% of your roster. And I'm sort of making up the numbers, but you get the sense I think that 15% is a little bit of a tipping point number. That if 15% of your roster is a knucklehead, pretty soon 80% of your roster is going to be knuckleheads. That you can kind of manage right there around 15% of your roster being guys that are just sort of here for sort of the mercenary type guy. Hey, I would have gone anywhere. Georgia seemed like a pretty good gig. I chose to come here. But you do want to sort of spice your roster up with like super elite talents that you perhaps had to win a bidding war for. They're not here for a season. They're here for a reason. One of those type of deals. You can have about 10 to 15% of your roster be that. And as long as you got a good nucleus of like the other 85%, then I think you might be okay. Let us see what else. We're going to get ready to go. Anything else on DawgNation.com before we leave? Yeah, we're going to get ready to wrap it up for today. Hey, fun stuff, everybody. Thanks for being here. We got it off to a great start here this week. We got a lot of football stuff to do away from the courtroom, and we'll do a lot of that tomorrow. We had to do this today, though, and it seemed like, people received it pretty well, so that's always a good thing. But we'll have regular football talk a lot the days to come here. a lot of fun going on here this summer. So y'all check out RS Andrews online. I got a great lunch coming up with Dari here very soon. That's going to be that's going to be fun. Looking forward to seeing Dari again, and looking forward to seeing all of you. So y'all check out the RS Andrews Cool Down every day at the end of our show, and check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. It is real summer now. It's hot. It's been hot. It's super hot this weekend. So that means ACs are cranked up and running hard. If yours is not working as well as it could, or if you're worried it might not be working as well as it could, our friends from RS Andrews want to help you out with that. So find them online, rsandrews.com. Old unit, they can get some new life out of that old unit, and it may only cost you $99. So find them online, rsandrews.com, for more on that. It's our RS Andrews Cool Down. Of course, we'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.